quite a bit, and the lecture that I was supposed to give I couldn't give, but we'll be doing it now. This is replacing the lecture on legal research methodology. Legal research methodology. We can. I mean, this. Frankly speaking, if you're a law student or a lawyer, it's not going to be rocket science. Pakistan, there are a few avenues that you can pursue, and we can discuss that. I hope we have space in this lecture to do, because we'll be skipping the military courts part, because I didn't touch upon that. So I have that in my slides as well, but we can skip through that. And did you guys discuss the Action Native Civil Power Regulations yesterday? Yeah, WACP.
Yes.
We did? Okay, so great. We'll see how that fits into this. If we have to go into detail, if you have questions, we can always discuss those as well. So today is Counter-Terrorism, Pakistan's legal regime. And what I want to look at here is a number of things. We're going to have a debate on human rights versus national security. Okay, and I want to know your views on that. I don't have much to offer there. So it'd be really good to get your views there. I hope you've got your thinking caps on. Let's go through an overview of what we'll be discussing. So we look at terrorism and militancy in Pakistan, we look at a few statistics. We'll then have that debate on human rights versus security. Then we're going to look at the concept of the spectrum of violence, how violence escalates and how the state deals with that. All right, what specific tools does it give itself to deal with escalating forms or aggravated forms of violence in the country. And this is generally applicable throughout the world. It's not just specific to Pakistan. But we'll be looking at Pakistan's response. Then we look at the specific laws. The Anti-Terrorism Act, very briefly, the Protection of Pakistan Act, which now does not apply anymore, thankfully. But it's useful to understand how the state of Pakistan thought we should deal with it, and what legislation or what tools it tried to give itself, and how that miserably failed at times. In fact, in this particular case. Military courts, we can skip that. I'm sure she's done everything, but we'll quickly go over it and how that fits into this debate. And of course, actions in aid of civil power regulations, whether we need to discuss that or not, but we'll briefly look at that as well. Any questions thus far? No? Alright, statistics, graphs. I don't know if you guys remember, most of you are probably too young, but maybe you would remember as well. In the mid-90s, we had pretty bad terrorism in Karachi, right? You had ethnic, political, linguistic grounds, and especially sectarian violence, right? What was happening in Karachi? Does anybody know? Or in the rest of the country as well? That was there as well. There were the
operation against.
Yes, there were operations against.
This is before I was born.
ANP was involved. So there was a lot of Pashtun, Urdu-speaking Muhajir violence against each other. There was a lot of sectarian violence. Sunni Shia killings were taking place. So in that backdrop, they decided to come up with particular laws. So the Anti-Terrorism Act was passed in 1997, right over there. Okay. And then we see right after that a lull in violence. Why do you think that took place? Without looking at the slides. Look at me.
Again, military takeover.
Yes, a military takeover took place in 1999. So we saw the early 2000s, there was a lot of violence. There was also the US invasion of Afghanistan, suppression in violence. So usually when a military dictator takes over, he has a iron fist. He can manage things. Generally, there's a tendency amongst violent organizations or criminals to curb their activities because there is a more, how would you call it? When a military thing takes over, so then we have more efficiency in law and order situations. So that's one particular aspect there. There was the US invasion, so the US invasion shifted our focus from our border with India to our border with Afghanistan. And that also changed the dynamics because there was terrorism or terrorist entities which would find safe haven in Afghanistan, and there was a link there as well. And the foreign hand, the Indian hand, was neutralized to some extent because we tried to normalize relationships. So Musharraf went and tried to shake Vajpayee's hand, if you remember that. So there was a lull in violence. There was an influx of foreign aid which we could divert to law and order situation, controlling that as well. So those were some factors there. But since 2004, we see a proper rise, a meteoric rise in terrorism. Okay? Unprecedented levels in Pakistan's history. thankfully, because of Operations Al-Qaeda and other operations, we see now that this level has gone down and it's come back to about this level now. Okay? So terrorism, we might feel it's still there very much, but actual incidents of terrorism are much lower, thankfully. Okay? And this has been a huge military success because countries the US has failed to bring down terrorism in countries.
Actually, Pakistan
has
been the best so far.
Exactly, the only country that has been this successful.
And reclaimed all its territories from.
Absolutely. So we still have a long way to go. That doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. But a huge, huge step has been taken. And we give a lot of credit to the armed forces. But it's not just their job. And what we'll see here is that from a legal angle, legislative angle, the legislator's job, and then the civilian executive institutions, for example, the police, the FIA, and counter-terrorism divisions, what is their role and how are they supposed to play that? And what empowers them to do this? The laws, specifically. So that's where the legislator's role comes in. That's what we're going to look at today. Let's look at the modus operandi of terrorists. So what did we have here? If you can see the colors properly, you had assassinations and armed assault as the primary method of attack or of causing terrorism. फिर लोगों ने बम बनाना सीख लिया, right? And they started using explosives, and that became the primary and is still the primary method of causing devastation. Suicide bombing, IEDs, all of these things. And this is extremely damaging because what you can get from a man holding a gun and having to fire, you can cause a lot more pain and suffering and death by just planting an IED and walking away, right? So if you have a target in mind, probably an armed assault would be a better goal if there's a specific target. But if you don't care who you kill, as terrorists do, as terrorists don't care, then it's just easy to plant a bomb and walk off in a marketplace, right? It's a far more effective tool, it gives a lot more devastation there, and the media coverage that you get from that is just as effective as an armed assault. In fact, there are a lot more variables in an armed assault. A man could get scared. He said, I'm not going to do this. He's going to walk off or something like that. So we see that explosives and bombings have become the modus operandi, the primary one. And you still have armed assault as well. And that takes place as well. These have gone down. These are, again, only statistics to 2014. The situation is a lot better now. This is a map I got from someone else's slide, colleague of ours. So we can see some of the explosions that are taking place and whatnot. I don't know how accurate it is. But what we see is 3 different hot spots which have been highlighted. 2 are in blue, 1 is in red. Why is that?
One ethnic and one army against terrorists.
Army against terrorists is close.
The blue one is ethnic.
Not just ethnic, no, there's a different thing. There's a different legal paradigm which applies to this. Okay, so we have the conflict paradigm applying in, that's why I said conflict and Qatar. Exactly. And we have a law enforcement paradigm applying in Karachi and Balochistan. Right. So you have different laws applying here. The Anti-Terrorism Act and these laws apply in Karachi and Balochistan. But you don't have that applying in Fatah. Because of its unique constitutional status, because of numerous other factors, because the armed forces are fully deployed there as well. Now, why did I say that this is someone else's map? Why did I take credit for this? Why did I say that this was someone else's map that I took?
Yes, maybe.
Because there's something wrong with this map. Who can point that out?
Kashmir.
Kashmir! Right? I would never in my decency put up a flag, put up a map which had Kashmir not part of Pakistan. Okay? Or at least not clearly. I know, they've done it a lot of times.
And we have to point it out.
There are some very major, because we get them off the internet, right?
Precisely.
And in the internet where nobody's going to give it to Pakistan, at least distribute it directly to get it. Right? But this because they've done a lot of menace and I don't know how to make these things flash, so I just copy this. Okay? But you should know that all of this is ours.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's that. Okay, now let's go to the debate. Okay? Human rights versus security. Why is this a versus thing? Why can't we say human rights and security?
Because those things don't go side by side.
To an extent. Anybody else?
Because
For security, you have to take some human rights away in order to
Absolutely, absolutely. It is an issue of optimality. Everything's been given out. Now the only way you can get more of one thing is by taking away from somewhere else, right?
temporary security infrastructure is usually set up in a way where certain human rights are always compromised.
Always infringed, absolutely. They are compromised, definitely.
Zero sum game.
Excellent.
Zero sum game for security we are taking the money.
But stated in security purposes are in contradiction with human rights prohibitions.
Alright, so you guys have studied human rights already in this course, generally in your lives, I'm sure. What exact human rights are we talking about here? Fundamental rights, okay, that's another name for human rights. Which ones? Life, liberty, property,
freedom from arrest, freedom of expression,
movement, justice, movement be liberty, maybe that's fair trial due process, right?
वकील दलील क्या कहते हैं वो FCR सर तारीफ बताएं ना अपील वकील है वो FCR में है
Due process हो गया, fair trial हो गया, torture, absolutely, so just for torturing.
Different laws.
Sorry?
Like different laws important from other.
Discrimination क्या बात कर रहे हैं? Discrimination डाल सकते हैं, why not? Too long a word.
Yeah, we save 1 second.
So what we see is we have specific rights that are mentioned here. How are these affected by counter-terrorism laws? How would the right to life be affected by counter-terrorism laws?
Because since it's also, I think it's also qualified law, conditional right. So if your action is putting somebody else's right, like right to life in danger, or has already done that, then the state has the authority and the security, whatever, whatever the infrastructure is, to take that right away from you and process you on
So
that.
what would that be called? The process of legally taking someone else's right, the life away? No, taking someone's life away. Capital punishment, the death penalty, right? So the death penalty is a violation of, or an alleged violation, but because it is qualified as subject to law, you can take someone's life away like that. But it is a struggle between security because you want to ensure that those who've done something terrible are punished for what they've done. And because they've killed other people, they forfeit their right to life.
Right.
You see? So that's what the debate there is. But it all falls into this vacuum here. Why are we giving people the death penalty for terrorism-related offences? Because we want to ensure that we get greater security by punishing these people, making an example out of them. Right? Okay, so that's one thing. How about liberty? How is liberty? You mentioned that. Preventive detention, right? So preventive detention is one form of vote. Anything else?
Confinement. Confinement. Once you have committed an action or something like that, then you is arrested and put into jail, and that takes away your rights to liberty.
Anti-Terrorism Act के नीचे offences are bailable, non-bailable.
I don't think they don't.
Non-bailable. Yeah. So the Anti-Terrorism Act, if you're accused of a terrorist offence, it's non-bailable. But that doesn't mean you don't get bail. Even in non-bailable offences, you can get bail, right? That works.
In this situation, Article 245 of the Constitution, if federal government is direct to armed forces involved, in such situation, Article 199 cannot be invoked of the
That's a
Constitution.
good point.
So High Court cannot, the jurisdiction of High Court can confine it. So it's very important point of view, human rights versus.
और 245 कराची में तो नहीं अप्लाई हो रहा।
Is it?
जहाँ पे 245 अप्लाई हो रहा है ना, वहाँ पे आपका Anti-Terrorism Act नहीं अप्लाई।
वहाँ पे तो double ACPR हो गया.
I'll explain that relationship. But you have an interesting point there, definitely. Let's go back to life. What other tools to the state can impact the right to life, other than death penalty? Socho.
Life imprisonment.
What other tools can the state give itself to legislation, which could impact your or my right to life?
Shoot to kill orders.
Shoot to kill orders, absolutely. When you give a police officer the right to kill, normal standard agar ek hai ki only in the prevention of an act, or if somebody is resisting arrest and he is liable for a death penalty offence. Those are generally the only offences that you can use for. If you lower that standard, terrorism offences mein shak ke bina mein, on the basis of suspicion alone that he's involved, you can shoot and kill.
Violence threshold नीचे आ गया.
Exactly. So you lower the threshold there. that again directly impacts the right to life. So we had a very convoluted and confusing thing in the Anti-Terrorism Act in Pakistan. We'll go through that in a bit, but just to give you, and we worked on this and helped change that quite a bit. And you can see our research in the case for change, the report that we have. So what initially, they said that on the basis of suspicion, you can shoot anyone. 1998, when this was challenged, they said, no, I'll show you the case as well. You know, in Mehram Ali and Liaquat Hussain, they said, no, yeah, this is too low a threshold. We can't do this. People need to, I mean, it's a serious violation of the right to life. So what they did was the court went overboard. And Supreme Court said that, use language that you can only shoot when shot at. You can only fire when fired upon. That's not even self-defense. Self-defense, I'll explain to you, we brought it to self-defense. You can only fire when fired upon. What does that mean? A police officer has to wait for a guy to shoot at him, a terrorist, hope to God he misses. Or hits him somewhere, heroic. Right? So he has to do that, and then only can he fire back.
Or hope that he's Sultan or something.
Exactly. That's really silly. That means your police officers are sitting ducks. And I have personally known police officers who in the face of terrorism were shooting in the air because they had such strict orders not to shoot at people.
Preemptive strike to khatam hogi sari phir.
Exactly. That's a different debate there. So you can understand how dangerous that is. So what we did a lot of research, and I personally took interest in this issue. And I said, you and me as a common man have more rights than the police officer facing terrorism. The right to self-defense extends to my person, if I have somebody who's going to attack me, to my family members, as well as to strangers. So if I saw somebody killing someone, or about to kill someone, I can take action there to prevent it. This is what we see. Now, because the Anti-Terrorism Act is a special law, it overrides the general law. The right to self-defense is available in the Pakistan Penal Code, sections 96 to 106, or 102. 96 to 106 में सब वो आते हैं, ठीक है? Go look at that. So that was the general law, but because this is a special law, it overrides that. That means the police officer is bound by the ATA, not by the self-defense rules. So we proposed an amendment. We talked to them. So Subi Saab was a member of the Zaid committee. I wrote an entire article on in the newspaper as well as in our case for change. And thankfully, according to that, we said let's bring it now in line with self-defense, or in Pakistan they call it private defense. Right? In Pakistan Penal Code, you'll see that. So that's what actually happened. And now it's much more different. And hopefully we'll go through that in a bit as well. Let's look at one or two more rights. There's one right that nobody's mentioned yet. That is the right of privacy. Absolutely. Why is that important?
So,
Government can launch surveillance program from phones, staff.
Absolutely. Modern day में terrorism or dealing or counter-terrorism is a intelligence-based, and intelligence is the tip of the spear. Okay, it is your primary mode to deal with these things. It's not enough to catch terrorists after they've done the act. You have to stop terrorism before it occurs, and that you can only do through intelligence-based operations. So the state's ability to be able to look through your phone records, or look through or listening to your calls, or listening to your SMSs, or WhatsApp messages, or emails, that all violates your right to privacy.
Which is a huge debate right now in the US.
In the US, absolutely. It's a massive debate.
Isn't it an interesting fact that nobody mentioned privacy, which it accurately represents our society's notion about privacy being
That's
a
exactly what
fundamental
we're
right.
discussing a bit. The hierarchy, or the value that we give to certain rights.
Yeah.
Having a right to life was other shit. But maybe we don't like this. When we value rights, so when we put them a list, we put privacy a lot lower than say another right, movement, for example. But let's look at some of the debates that will come up. So I'm talking about right, theoretically, some rights to baatein kar. But when the rubber hits the road, the actual nitty-gritty of it, it's very difficult. Because if you want to protect the right to life more, you have to then limit the powers of a police officer to shoot a guy. Or you have to limit the ability of the state to detain a guy who they really think might be involved in terrorism, but they're not sure because they haven't been able to, he's been good. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what do you do when you know your state's ability to collect evidence is really weak? You don't have the proper investigators or the proper police ability to do that. उसमें क्या करते हैं फिर आप? When you know that you have these structural, systematic or systemic deficiencies, how can you deal with terrorism then? That we know that this, we're pretty sure that this guy's involved. We just don't have the evidence right now. What do you do in that situation? Extrajudicial killing? That's what was happening. Missing persons? That's what was happening. So you do entire debates and TV and all of that. It has to do with this and this debate that we're having right now. It's easy to talk about missing persons are terrible issue, this and that. How else is the state supposed to deal with it? I'm not saying at all that the missing persons is a good thing. It was a silly solution.
Yeah.
But then there were solutions to it that they didn't take. That the state simply didn't have the capacity to understand and implement. Okay? That's why when we talk about AACPR or detention for the duration of a conflict, at least you know that there's a person, his name is written down somewhere, he's treated according to a certain standard. At least he's not killed off. So it's when you're balancing rights with security, you have the right to life on one hand, killing him off extrajudicially, or you can detain him and keep him safe and alive at least until evidence can be gathered for him, or at least till he's not causing a problem in the operations that are taking place. So it's an extremely difficult and complex equation, and that's why I put that on the slide as well. It's an exceptionally complex equation. Every state, every community has a different balance to seek here. All right? So what do you think are some factors which impact this thing? This is a silly question, it's a little complex, so why don't I just show you those factors? Okay, so factors impacting this equation. Existing human rights protections in the state. How well does the state protect human rights? Anyway, every society is different. Western Europe may have a very different outlook. You have the European Court of Human Rights, which we discussed, and they have a very strong protections, pro-protection and pro-safeguard ideology. Are your human rights entrenched? Is there a constitution which gives you fundamental rights? Yes, we do.
Yes.
But every single right in the constitution, literally every single one, except the right to dignity, is qualified, subject to law. Alright? So there is a law that could abridge, modify, limit those rights. So we got that down, right?
Except right to dignity.
Dignity. But what is dignity?
Oh, yeah,
Define to me dignity. आपको हक है अच्छे सूट पहनने I look dignified. I mean, what does dignity really mean?
Human dignity is basically.
So the most nebulous term, the most vague term they've said, both puri But so these are some issues that we need to look at. So existing human rights protections in the state, are they protected? Are they entrenched? Do we have not only do we have them in the constitution, but is there strong jurisprudence of the Supreme Court and the High Court which defends these? एक जगह पे लिखा होना is one thing. Implementation on the ground is a completely different thing. Who implements it? Your courts, right? So if the state violates a right, or if somebody else, a private citizen violates a right, does the state and its judiciary protect you? That is what you mean by entrenchment. Okay, they're protected, they're entrenched. Then you could have constitutions where there isn't an entrenched right, but your courts are so strong that they will defend your rights there. So unwritten constitutions, for example, like the UK, Israel, for example, you have strong protections of rights regardless of that. Existing restrictions on human rights imposed by counter-terrorism law. So the existing current counter-terrorism legislation, how much does it take away? How much does it trample on human rights? So you could have normal criminal law running, this way everybody has due process, a fair trial and everything. But then suddenly if it's a counter-terrorism case, all your rights are gone. So does your counter-terrorism legislation already take away everything from you? Because then you can assess that there's a mindset within the state which says, counter-terrorism, we don't care what happens. Rights are not an issue. So we can make any legislation that we want. And that's somewhat the kind of position that we had in Pakistan. Especially with the Protection of Pakistan Act. When we look at some of the provisions in it, which are my favorite pieces of law ever, and we can go through that. How are the various human rights prioritized? Now this is the debate that we were having. How do you give a hierarchy of rights in society? What do you think is more important? What weightage dete hain aap? Any particular right? right to life को, you would obviously, I think any society in the world would put that really high up there. Right to liberty would be pretty high up there. And that's why there's strong safeguards for it. This bail, the concept of bail, right? You may be accused, but you're only accused, you're still innocent until proven guilty. Right? That's why we have bail, and that's why it's such an important factor there. What is the level of trust between citizens and the executive or law enforcement bodies? If you trust the state to take the right decision, if you trust the police, they're not going to abuse their power, and these state, you're far more willing to then give up certain of your rights there. But if you know that anything could happen, these guys, if they get more power, they could abuse that for common citizens who are not connected with terrorism and abuse it there. That's where it becomes a concern. So, in the debate between human rights versus security, the level of trust between state institutions and the citizenry is extremely important. Any input here? Any comments?
When I was working in human rights cells in Pakistan, they used to come and things from the citizens on the ground from humanity, and the majority of the complaints were against police officers. क्या आप केस लेके गए हैं अपना कोई human rights का कोई चीज़ नहीं, और वो जिस तरह से एक्सप्लॉइट करते हैं और सारा कुछ वहीं से स्टार्ट, बिकॉज आपका लॉ ये वो करता है कि आप पुलिस के पास जाओगे, FIR होगा, वहाँ से आपका लीगल प्रोसीजर स्टार्ट होगा, बट फ्रॉम द वेरी बिगिनिंग वहीं से चीज़ जो है
Absolutely. It's a huge problem. I mean, I've met with international consultants who come to work with the police, and they've said that Pakistan police is unreformable. That's the term they use. ये ठीक नहीं हो सकता. But यार ये गोरा कह सकता है बाहर से, UK से, US से आके. हमारे पास we don't have the luxury of saying that. It has to be reformed. That's why you see गोरा आएगा 2 साल काम करेगा and then he'll go. Right? Or he'll think, oh, see, उसका बन गया पाकिस्तान जैसे dangerous movement.
Exactly.
We're here on the ground working day in, day out to reform the system because we don't have a choice.
Does Interpol इसका कोई कहीं से कोई लिंक बन रहा है कि वो हमारी लोकल पुलिस के साथ कहीं से रिफॉर्म?
I mean, Interpol has a different role to play. I don't think they work that much on these issues, but police reform definitely is a big issue. One of the biggest issues when it comes to development funds that come to Pakistan, a lot goes into police reform.
क्योंकि जहाँ बात जुडिशरी की हो रही है, एग्जीक्यूशन की हो रही है, it goes back to the very first step.
Absolutely, the biggest factor is there are a lot of factors. We can discuss this.
So the reform to them, I guess, is about the changing of uniform.
Yeah, yes. Make it look more like Fauji Shah हमारी performance की बस. Right.
एक बात है लाहौर को पता नहीं चलता पुलिस हो जाती है.
Honestly, यार.
2 दफा हम.
मैं तो पुलिस वाला ढूंढ रहा था पास डायरेक्शन में मिल नहीं रहा था. फिर मैं क्या हो?
I said, but the interesting thing was कि कैंटोन में जब मैं रुका ना, मुझे ये रियलाइज हुआ पुलिस में बड़ा था, इसको क्या पूछना है यार, आगे चलते हैं. लेकिन I mean that's the reputation that they've set for themselves.
It is unfortunate, but you have to see a lot of problems and which is out of their hands. Funds, corruption की आप बात कर रहे हैं, ठीक है. That's there. But simply lack of resources. We had, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, we had a police fellow come in and he said in Punjab, the richest province, Punjab में murder investigation के लिए जो budget allocate की जाती है is 250 rupees. This was back then. 250 rupees. You know how much a DNA test costs? The most basic, जिसमें error rate काफी होगा, ठीक है, is 1400 rupees. You don't have enough money कि आप evidence लेके किसी को भेज दें. You don't have enough money कि जो the place where the incident occurred, वहाँ पे पहुँचने के लिए पेट्रोल नहीं. ठीक है, Jaipur, that's the one. You know how terrible my life is. But anyway, so it's so difficult. ठीक है, 250 रुपए में बंदा कितना कर सकता है? So I mean there are a lot of problems with police. We like to criticize the police, but उन बेचारों को भी oftentimes कुछ नहीं. Plus we've seen कि they just are not given enough training. ठीक है, training times have dropped in police colleges around the country. So जिस बंदे ने तफ्तीश करनी है, जिसने investigation करना है, वो बंदा is just simply not given the training.
He's learning on the job. Absolutely. 10 murder cases के बाद उसको पहले.
और जो सबसे बड़ा problem हमने देखा है ना is the culture of particular. So if you've been given 10 rupees to solve all your problems, and you've been given this for the last 50 years, तो जो techniques बन जाएंगे ना, cutting corners, padding of the FIR and all of that, वही आप apply करते रहेंगे. So it becomes a tradition in the police force, or in that thana. So the next guy who comes in, even if you give him 500 rupees,
उसने वही करनी है।
उसने वही करनी है, exactly. So this CRPC culture, criminal procedure code culture that has developed, breaking that down is one of the biggest tasks that you can have. It's extremely difficult. So it's the cultural things, not the things written down in the law, that you need to change sometimes. This can only be done by training and giving mentorship to these officers. Let's quickly get back to this.